Hello there, fellow Planeswalker. Do you play Modern? If so, I'm sure that you are well aware of the situation that we have going on. Rampant 4 and 5 colored decks, extremely greedy mana bases. Something must be done to stop this menace, if Wizards of the Coast can't do something about it. So, today, I am showcasing to you my Blue Moon deck, Faeries of the Blue Moon. Now, this deck is both a Blue Moon deck and a Fairy deck. The whole reason that we run this deck is for the card Blood Moon. One of the most important cards in the meta right now, due to the greedy mana bases that so many decks rely on. Blood Moon can essentially cripple them out of the game. This is the main reason that we stray from our dimmer colors in Faeries. Instead, we choose to go red-blue, just so we may run this Blood Moon. So let's get into the deck tech. First, we have our Faeries. Fairy Seer is a great little one-drop that can scry into our deck so we can peer deeply into it, set ourselves up for later turns. Having more small fairies works very well alongside our Spellstutter Sprite. Spellstutter Sprite is essentially a counterspell on a stick, where we can counter spells equal or less than the amount of fairies that we control. So Spellstutter Sprite and Fairy Seer go well together for that purpose. A new threat that fairies have been lacking for quite some time, which really isn't that new, is Sprite Dragon. It is indeed a fairy and also blue-red, so it slots into the deck very nicely. It holds the distinction over Murktide Regent that it can come out early and start attacking right away, and become a late-game threat on its own if left unchecked. However, Sprite Dragon does fall off more late-game. Murktide Regent would be a better option for that. However, the fact that this is a fairy works very well with our Spellstutter Sprite plan. We have Brazen Borrower, one copy, that allows us to remove a non-land permanent back to our opponent's hand, and then flash this Brazen Borrower out during our opponent's end phase, so that it can start swinging immediately. It is quite a powerful card. Coupled with all of the fairies combined, we have a good set of fairies overall. Alongside those fairies, we have two Scion of Una, which can come down and protect our fairies at instant speed. So we can block Fatal Push, Unholy Heat, Lightning Bolt, and Path to Exile, just to name a few. Scion of Una is a sleeper card that has not seen too much play in Modern these days, as fairies have been out of favor for quite some time. To round out our creatures, we have Subtlety. Subtlety is essentially like a Force of Will, but for a creature or planeswalker spell. But we basically just take a spell that is on the stack, that is a creature or a planeswalker, put it on top or bottom of their library. So it is essential against decks that are going to be playing creature spells or planeswalkers. To round out our fairy list here, we have instant and sorceries. Obviously, we have two Expressive Iteration. Expressive Iteration is an excellent card that can allow us to dig a little deeply into our deck, and if one of those cards happens to be a land, and we haven't made our land drop, we can exile that land and play it. Or any other card that we see that we may need. This is a powerful tool to be able to dig and play extra cards and generate card advantage. The instants in our spellbook, Archmage's Charm. is an excellent modal card that can do many things, but is a jack of all trades for the deck, but master of none. Cryptic Command is another copy of Counterspell, essentially just like Archmage's Charm, but it is a modal spell that we get to choose two things. So it's just more options for us against any type of deck. Counterspell is Counterspell. We all know it. We all love it or hate it. You know what it does. Force of Negation is going to stop those Living End decks when they try to cascade out their Living End. If we are tapped out, we can Force of Negation that and stop them from doing their Living End or Crashing Footfalls or whatever thing that they plan on doing. 4 Lightning Bolt is the premier removal spell in the deck. It isn't the best, but it does help close out games if we need to bolt our opponents in the face. 1 copy of Magmatic Sinkhole is actually quite great against planeswalkers or creatures. It isn't as good as Unholy Heat altogether, but we're not going Delirium. So we can utilize this Delve mechanic with Magmatic Sinkhole to basically get the same idea as Unholy Heat, but it isn't as consistent, so we only run 1 copy. 4 copies of Opt to cast during our opponent's end phase and try to dig more deeply into our deck and adjust our draws as needed. 2 Spell Pierce alongside 2 Vapor Snag work very well for our turn 1, as we can actually counter a non-creature spell of theirs or return a creature spell of theirs to their hand with Vapor Snag, so that way that gets them off of their tempo. This overall is a control fairy shell within a Blue Moon deck. For our land base, where we are not being quite greedy at all, we do have only 4 fetch lands, Scalding Tarn, alongside 2 Field of Ruin, just in case we do run into those decks that run absolutely no basic lands. We can effectively wasteland our opponent. With this in mind, we do run a lot of islands at 7 copies, alongside 1 copy of Mountain, as everything else is going to become a mountain anyway. We do run some dual lands, just to start our game off, to give us some color fixing. 1 copy of Steam Vents to get off of our Scalding Tarn, 2 Spire Bluff Canals for the fast mana, and 1 copy of Fiery Islet, just in case we haven't gotten to our things like Blood Moon and we need to crack this to draw a card. Mutavault is there just to become a creature if it needs to be, and we are not on the Blue Moon plan. For our sideboard, we have decided to run 2 copies of Dress Down to effectively stop any creature-based strategies, 2 Engineered Explosives, as we have not very many great ways to remove enchantments. Engineered Explosives can do just that, as well as take out any strategies that rely on a certain converted mana cost. Engineered Explosives is great for that. 1 copy of Flame Sweep can be good for the small low-to-the-ground decks. We won't be dealing any damage to any of our creatures in our decks, but will be dealing damage to all of our opponent's creatures. 1 Glenalendra Archmage for additional counterplay with a Fairy Body. 2 Shattering Spree to destroy those pesky artifacts. 2 Sower of Temptation to take control of some of our opponent's great threats that we might be able to take games with that. Spreading Seas at 3 copies can be teched out against a mono red deck or a deck that leans into red heavily. We can use Spreading Seas in replacement of the Blood Moon to draw a card and hurt their mana base. Finally, we have 2 Surgical Extractions to shut down any strategies that we see fit. So that was Fairies of the Blue Moon. What did you think of this deck? Would you make any changes? I think this deck could come out of nowhere and surprise a lot of modern players who are using these greedy mana-based decks, and can even perform well in the mirror match because Faeries tend to out-tempo opponents quite well. We're going to have threats on board while also countering their things. So we have an advantage in most matchups in the modern metagame. If you liked this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ding that bell for more videos just like this. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.